Welcome, and thank you for joining us. This is an important moment for all of us. And what's happening in this country right now is painful and powerful. And the Orange is the New Black cast wanted to let you know that we are here with you, and here for you. The entire cast feels connected to the protests. I know what it feels like to suffer injustice, but I want to know what it feels like to win justice. It's personal and it's real for all of us in this cast.
I know you are here because you cared about our characters, about what happened to them, about their inner lives. We need you to care about the real life versions of them too. We need to care about racial justice. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. Those are names you probably now know. And there is Sean Reed, Tony McDade, maybe names you don't know yet.
You are going to hear about what different people targeted by the criminal justice system are going through. You're going to hear from people who are transforming our society, like Rashad Robinson, Andrea James, and Stacey Abrams. They are going to tell you about how people are organizing to end racism and how you can be a part of it.
You're also going to hear about history, how we got here, from Dr. Elizabeth Hinton, who will explain the deeply racist roots of our criminal justice system. And you'll hear from Rachel Cargill, a truly profound teacher, who helps people come to terms with undoing racism within themselves and in their lives.
We're here above all so that you can hear about all the ways that you can get involved. We're going to give you some really specific things that you can do, and we hope that you'll join in and take action. This moment needs all of us.
You're going to find a role for yourself in this story. You're going to want to donate. You're going to want to demand that television actually shows the truth of the system, but you're going to jump in, and we're jumping in with you.
Over the last weeks, we have seen the truth of anti-Black violence in our society, how systemic it is, how vicious it is, how it destroys lives and entire communities. We've seen the way that the most fundamental human rights of Black people are undermined and attacked every single day. You saw some of this on the show, how the system works, how it incentivizes violence and abuse.
On the show, Pusey Washington was killed by a prison guard. That violence is no fiction. That racism is real. For every Pusey, there are so many more people out there in real life, especially Black people. People who had their freedom taken away. People who have been murdered by police.
Last year, police killed 3 people every day. Police are almost never charged. I'm talking about 1% of all cases.
And those stats are painful. And this is an incredibly painful moment, but it is also a very powerful moment. This is a moment that millions of people have been waiting for, a moment when big changes can happen.
We are here with you to talk about action, to talk about disruption, what we can do.
That brings us to our first conversation, someone who is actually a major change maker on racial justice, Rashad Robinson. Rashad is the president of Color of Change, the largest online racial justice organization in the country. One of the organizations that has been the most powerful and effective in fighting for racial justice, not only in the criminal justice system and the movement for police accountability and prosecutor accountability, but on issues of racism everywhere. Welcome, Rashad. Rashad, a lot of people just want to know what to do, what's effective, what will actually matter. Sometimes it's hard to know what giving $10 does, or what signing a petition does, or even what being in the street really does. Right now, what is the goal we should be focusing on, and what is the most important thing our fans out there can do?
So just like a cast a TV show takes lots of different people to engage. Activism, changing the context, changing the rules, actually takes millions of people of all different walks, of all different lives, playing various roles. And so we have people at the local level all around the country working to change the role of their district attorneys. There are 2,400 DAs all around the country, and they're the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space. And we have to do work to change the rules about how they engage in justice, ensuring that they hold police accountable, that they stop running up mass incarceration, and people engaged can do that. And we are welcoming people to that effort through winningjustice.org. There are going to be people at the national level working to push for policy reform. And yes, protest and engagement on the streets matters, because we have to vote and we have to put people in office, but we have to hold those folks accountable. And so much of the movement we are seeing in cities around the country at changing the budgets around policing, at changing the sort of laws and rules around policing, so much of what's starting to bubble up is happening with the same people we already elected. But those people are now being challenged in new ways. So part of narrative change, part of rule change is changing what's acceptable, which is the floor, and changing what is possible, which is the ceiling. And that is what movement building is all about. So just don't give $10. Get involved in a local racial justice organization in your community. Get involved in an organization like Color of Change. Make your voice heard. Talk to the people in your networks, your friends, your family. Have those tough conversations about racial justice. Continue to do the work to challenge people in the workplace, challenge the corporations and the businesses where you may work to not just say Black Lives Matter with a hashtag, but ensure that they make Black Lives Matter. We have the power to make a difference in this era, but it's going to take us working on all cylinders to do it. And so I just want to welcome you into this work to make justice real.
There's a whole conversation right now that's going on about defunding the police. And it's a very controversial thing. And a lot of people are like on the fence about it, don't know, or are insecure about it, or like, what does this mean for like safety for everybody? I'm one of those people who is kind of has questions about it. Can you talk a little bit about what defunding the police might look like? And for people who are kind of like, I don't know about that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So what it means for me is this. For the last 20 years in this country, violent crime has basically steadily went down. But we have continued to put more and more money into police budgets. We've given them tanks and military-grade equipment. And when you go into many communities, many Black communities and brown communities in particular, what you'll see is communities that don't have fresh food, communities that don't have good schools, communities that don't have healthcare, but communities that have a lot of police. And so what we're talking about here is divesting from the things that have not kept us safe and investing in the things that do. And so it's not that we don't want to have a system of rules, that we don't have consequences for people that hurt us, that we don't sort of have law, we don't have laws and we don't have rules. But what it does mean is that in this era, we have put a lot of money into policing. And as a result, Black and brown people continue to have so many more interactions with police. So when someone is homeless, we send someone with a gun. When a kid is not showing up to school, we send someone with a gun. When a person is having a mental health episode, we send someone with a gun. And that has not worked. And so part of what we are talking about, and exactly what we're talking about when we talk about defunding, is resetting our priorities. Putting our money where our intentions and our vision is. If we want to have communities that are safe and just, we need to look at the communities that are safe and just. And the communities that are safe and just have good schools, they have healthcare, they have all sorts of other services that ensure that those communities are whole. And that's what Black and brown communities need. You know, if police were the thing that made all of us safe, everyone would feel deeply safe in the hood. But in fact, communities that have a lot of police are oftentimes the communities that are not safe, because we've decided to only fund control and policing and not fund the things that we know keep us safe.
Absolutely. I love that what you said, Rashad, is holding folks accountable. We have to hold people accountable. And I love that you broke down the defunding of the police, because that word alone, it puts people in a panic and it turns people off. So thanks for clarifying that.
Well, remember 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when to say Black Lives Matter turned folks off.
Yes.
It made people uncomfortable. Well, what do you mean? Do I not matter? Defunding the police doesn't mean that we don't have safety and we don't have justice. It means that, you know, in many cities around the country, the majority of the city budget is policing. It's the majority of the city budget is controlling people. And that has not kept us safe. And we only have to look at viral video after viral video to know that the police have not done good things with all the money they've been given. The United States has 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's population who is incarcerated. That means we are doing something absolutely wrong in terms of how we are thinking about safety and justice. We are putting far too much money in locking people up, and we could put a lot more money in funding our futures.
Thank you so much, Rashad, for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you.
Are incredible. You've enlightened me, and I think you've enlightened so many of us. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Natasha and Dash, I want to talk about what being involved in Orange and the New Black what it has meant for us, for you, not so much as actors, but as people who care about these issues and have had experiences with these issues. So Dash, in what ways is Orange is the New Black personal for you? How did you connect to the story or even your own character, and to what actually is happening in the real world?
Well, I think that one of the things that Orange is the New Black did for us and for the audience is educate us on what is needed in our prison systems, prison reform, what we need to change. As an actor, yes, you go in there thinking it's just entertainment, but as a person, you actually are exposed to things that you would never think of. Dayanara was somebody that was either abused by the guards, that had to take action in her own hands and to not get the equal opportunity to even get a trial. And we see that so often. We see when there's holes within the system, when there's abuse going on, whether it's mentally, whether it's physically, and because it's an inmate, it has no value. I myself have spoken about it, what is the true focus here? We see that this is a systemic issue. We see that there's redlining. We see that there's marginalization. We see that there's segregation, and it continues, and we suppress it. And we live in fear to speak up. And I think that the beauty, the silver lining in all this, whether you can relate to it or not, is that this is a humanity issue. And people are taking the courage to speak up, whether it's via any platform, whether it's in person. I think that we need to realize this is a great time for change. This is a great moment for us to unite. And it is our responsibility to not live in fear, to speak up. And really briefly, Uzo and Natasha, I just wanted to also announce that I have just, as of today, have become the ambassador for the Innocence Project organization. And that's what I can contribute to
Yes, girl.
my community.
Yes.
Yes.
Natasha, what about you? You want to speak a little bit on how your connection?
Yeah. First of all, I'm very happy to see you guys and really love you guys. I'm about to go off. Because as we know, in my personal experience, obviously, Nikki Nichols and I have a lot in common. We have a, history of drug addiction. I'm a person in recovery. And the bottom line is, like, I can look at my life and just know for a fact that I would have been targeted differently if, based on the color of my skin. Here I get to sit with you guys, with our great TV show and this whole life, and otherwise would have been likely had a life in the system. And that is the reality. The drug war was never really about drugs. It's so obviously about race. It's blatant. White people who use drugs, whether they're celebrities or everyday people, they get compassion. We're told we need help, that we're the victims. When Black people use the same drugs in the same way, even in the same city, they're told they're not a victim, they're a perpetrator. They don't need help, they don't need compassion, they need punishment. Just like the worst thing you can do for an addict, and is so mean, It really is like so fucked up. Just everything that we think about drugs is a complete lie. White supremacy and systemic racial injustice are a soul sickness at the root of this country. And racism is definitely at the root, at the very origin of the drug war. And it's playing out today just like Nixon designed it in the 60s. Okay, it's for politics. It's not for safety. It's to keep Black people and other minorities down. And this country imprisons more people for drug offenses than all the Western European nations in prison for all crimes combined. So no human society has ever before imprisoned this high a proportion of its population. And the system is working perfectly as planned to tear down these communities. So that's just how I feel, that this country is clearly built on a Native American burial ground, and that the entire thing is built on a lie. And the drug war specifically really accomplished its mission in giving our government a license to kill.
That's right.
So it makes me very upset. That makes me upset, you guys.
The first thing that I learned from doing when we started Orange was that good people can make mistakes, but people of a certain hue will go away forever for those mistakes. I know good people who have lost their freedoms, whether it's physical freedom because they're still a part of the prison systems, or their lives could never be restored because of the effects of being made part of the system. And I think for myself, walking through the show, I thought what was beautiful about it, and I think the thing that was like the carriage that I would hold, was the empathy for the individual, that the people that were playing are so much more, I can't hammer it home, so much more than a number, than the crime, because how they even got here almost had this much to do with what put them in the system. I think it was Taylor who said, earlier today, that as much as you all have enjoyed, everybody has enjoyed these characters that were played, there are people who are living this every single day, this experience. And the question becomes, how did they get here though? And why some and not the other? And that's the thing. And Natasha, your story, all of it. But I know we have to spread the love and share it out. I love you guys. I do.
I love y'all.
We have to keep the conversation going.
Love ya.
Love you guys.
There is so much at stake in these conversations that we're having right now. Now, before I introduce the next guest, I just want to put a couple of stats in your mind to think about. Police violence is one of the leading causes of death for young men of color. If we don't change policing, think about this now. 1 Black man or boy out of every 1,000 Black man or boy will be killed by a police officer. That is staggering. 1 out of 1,000. Just think about that. And now let's talk about our women. The police and the whole system treats Black women differently too. There's a term called, and I want to put this out there and I want you all to remember this, adultification bias. And what that means is young Black girls are held to a higher standard of maturation than their age really, their level of development really is. Prosecutors send Black girls into incarceration 3.5 more times than white girls. And Black women and girls are constantly harassed and driven into the system for the smallest things. Things that white women and girls don't even get arrested for. And this whole system of attacking Black people has created a world in which almost 1 in 2 Black women have a loved one in prison or in jail. But we know you're not here just to hear from us. So let's bring in a real expert. Let's bring in some history. I'm so happy to introduce you all to Dr. Elizabeth Hinton. She is a professor of history, African American studies, and law. 3 times a degree, okay? At Yale University. She's an expert on the persistence of poverty and racial inequality in our 20th century America and why it's systemic. And she's going to talk about why this whole cycle has started, what started it and why it continues to persist. She wrote her book, From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime, The Making of Mass Incarceration in America. Dr. Elizabeth Hinton, I'm so excited to have you here. Please,
I'm so excited to be here.
break down the history for us.
Okay, so I think Natasha actually said it really good. She said, I wrote this down, this country was built on a Native American burial ground. So if we want to understand anything about how we got here, we have to go back to the genocide of Native Americans and slavery. So as soon as these white settlers started coming over and settled in colonial New England, they organized these militias known as the Indian constables, right? To basically surveil and monitor Native Americans and to protect themselves against possible Native American retaliation, okay? In the South, you had these organizations of white men into similar militia type groups. And basically, any white person in the South had legal authority over any Black person. So if you're white in the South, you had the power to arrest a Black person. I mean, we already see the legacies of that today, right? Most recently with the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, but Trayvon Martin, this is the kind of roots of our stand your ground laws, okay? Slave patrols. So groups of white men just organize and decide we want to police slaves and we want to help the slaveholders out. They could raid slave dwellings. They could search them for contraband like guns, because of course slaves couldn't carry guns because rebellion was always a threat. And books, because we know it was illegal for slaves to know how to read and write, and maintain surveillance and patrol in general. So if we think about these functions, right? Raiding, surveillance, patrol, contraband, searching for contraband, these are really the kind of predecessors for policing and law enforcement as we know it today. And policing and incarceration has always been about protecting the social order, which is white supremacy, and controlling poor people and people of color. This has been built in the very fabric of our society, the very fabric. Every time rights are extended to certain groups in this country, and African Americans in particular, there's a subsequent clampdown on those rights. And that takes the form of new laws and new systems of systematic incarceration. So first, immediately after slavery, after the Civil War, we get the enactment of the Black Codes, which basically prevented 4 million newly freed people from being able to own arms or testify in court. And most of these Black codes established by the former Confederate states had vagrancy laws, which basically meant that if you weren't working for a white person as a Black person, you could be arrested and sent to labor in this new incarceration system administered by private industry, okay? So 100 years later, after this, 1965, at the height of the civil rights movement and progressive social change in this country, President Lyndon Johnson calls for the war on crime and begins an unprecedented federal investment in police forces, so the militarizing police that we see today, courts, and the prison system. And we are living in the shadow of that decision, of that war on crime today, and that helps us understand how we got to George Floyd.
How does one even begin to unravel our prison system? How do we even begin to figure our way out of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ways in which mass incarceration and the kind of system of policing and criminal justice seeps into the lives of so many Americans, and every facet of our society makes the idea of overcoming our mass incarceration society somewhat daunting. But I think part of it is, one, we've got to, as a nation, begin to reckon with racism in new ways. We've got to think about how to understand our history and some of what I just touched upon. And then I think it's about thinking about, like, what kind of a society do we want to build? Like, what does equality mean for everyone? How can we achieve that? And that means that the people in power and elites and white people are going to have to give something up. But with that, what if we transformed how we thought about public safety? Going back to something that Rashad Robinson said, like, what if we think about our spending priorities, and instead of investing in police and prisons, we invested in, vibrant school systems and decent housing for people and jobs?
I had the chance a few years ago. One of my neighbors was the chief of staff for DeKalb County Jail, and I had a chance to visit the system, and a lot of inmates get transferred, and so they don't complete their education when they're incarcerated. So then when they come out, there's that difficulty in how do you pick back up? Can you speak a little bit about education in the prison system? What challenges you've seen? Just tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, this is something that's really near and dear to my heart as an educator. And, you know, I really feel like institutions, and especially elite institutions of higher learning, have a responsibility to step up and begin expanding educational opportunities to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. I mean, you know, for all of the really gross and alarming racial disparities in the justice system, education is actually a greater prediction for future incarceration than race. So if you're a white person who didn't graduate from high school, you're much more likely to go to prison than a person of color who did graduate from high school, right? So, you know, again, this is thinking about reframing priorities. We could look at prisons, people who are in prison, and say, wow, this is a group of people, because between like 56 and 69% of people in prison don't have high school diplomas. So this is a group that has been undereducated due to socioeconomic conditions and many things beyond their control, such as growing up in a community with really bad school systems. So instead of just creating the system of prisons that warehouse people, where people languish and like can't be as productive as they should, this is an opportunity to say, let's invest resources and educate the most undereducated people in society. And I think this is really key to thinking about too, like moving beyond a mass incarceration society. What are ways that people can re-enter and can contribute and become, you know, really vital on the outside once they've served their sentences?
Elizabeth, I think I can speak for all of us when we say prioritizing education is a real passion for all of us on the show, and the show itself provided such an education for all of us in our different spheres. Thank you so much for talking with us today. We're getting messages saying, please wrap up this amazing discussion. But I would encourage everybody to look to Elizabeth Hinton's work, to read her work. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we promised you that we wouldn't tell you about all the problems without telling you the solutions. Now, remember what Rashad Robinson said from Color of Change about how to hold these prosecutors accountable for their actions by going to winningjustice.org, donating, but more importantly, taking action, seeing how you can get involved in these prosecutor elections, know what government officials are running for office, what their platforms are, if it aligns with your beliefs and ideal systems and what the collective body is trying to do right now, and vote them in office. We have to fight racism on every front. Please visit colorofchange.org. Kate, I want to check in with you. I know you've been listening to a lot of history. I want to check in with my white folks. How are my white folks doing right now? I know it's probably overwhelming right now with all the information you've been giving. And I know it's emotional, and I know there are a lot of feelings out there. So I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing, seeing how you're taking in all the information that you've been hearing. This is just the beginning. How do you connect learning about history with helping to change the course of history?
First, it's great to see you, Adrienne. Vibrant, smart, as always. It's a lot to absorb, because what's striking me is that I have a lot to learn as a white woman, and a white woman of a mature age. That's something to really have. It's tough to swallow that. But it's important not to get overwhelmed, because we've got to lean into it. We've got to lean into the learning. I think understanding history helps us understand how we got here, but it also helps us understand how to change the course we're on, how to change history. As Toni Morris has said, race is a white problem. That means we have to change. White people have to change. Ibram X. Kendi says in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, one of those books that's truly changed the conversation, what's the problem with claiming to be not racist? It is a claim that signifies neutrality. That's the problem. I am not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But there's no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it is anti-racist. To change history, we have to change our mindset to a mindset of being anti-racist in everything we do and in all the policies of society.
I'm going to bring us into a different type of learning now, learning about ourselves and how we individually uphold systems of oppression. I believe education has the power to organically precipitate change. Unlearning the white supremacist, revisionist history we as Americans have been fed and translating that knowledge into action is a responsibility everyone needs to take on. For me, this looks like actively seeking ways to redistribute my privilege, making sure a portion of my income and my energy goes directly into supporting Black leaders and communities. In my work life, this looks like actively seeking out and supporting the work of storytellers who decentralize the white experience and amplify the voices, bodies, and lives of Black people and all those who have been pushed to the side for far too long. I have to play an active role in pushing back. Rachel, welcome. You are a revolutionary academic and activist, founder of the Loveland Foundation, which is an organization dedicated to showing up for communities of color in unique and powerful ways, especially in terms of mental health. It is a true honor that you are here joining us.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you, what does the path to becoming truly anti-racist look like? How do people go from learning to think differently to actually acting differently?
There's a lot of conversation right now around being an ally. And as Brittany Packnett spoke recently online, and a conversation that a lot of Black people in general, particularly anti-racism activists, are having, that we have to move from being an ally to being an accomplice, in upending these systems that are oppressing so many people and ultimately are killing us all. These systems were not made to be sustained, and they were created in ways that they cannot be sustained if they're not constantly oppressing some group. And so those who benefit from those systems, even if they aren't actively participating in it, even if they aren't consciously participating in it, I should say, they are benefiting from it, whether they know it or not. And so right now, the way that I'm teaching is through a framework that I created that says knowledge plus empathy plus action. But we have to move it further than that, especially in times like these that are reflective of times that have been here for a very long time. Critical knowledge, radical empathy, and intentional action. And looking at each of those will help provide some sort of pathway to move from just being an ally, just saying I see you, to saying I am part of doing what needs to be done to upend these systems that are hurting so many. So I'd love to just go through each of those really quickly to explain how it looks and how you show up. With critical knowledge, when you look at, I encourage everyone to look at the books that they're reading about racism, about Black people, about American history. Who's writing it? Who gets to be the knowers? Who gets to be the experts? In my research, it's so many times that white people are being the voices for Black people and their experiences. So I highly encourage people to look out critical knowledge that is coming from the voices of the people they're looking to be an ally and accomplice to. So you really have to ask the question, who gets to be the expert and who gets to be heard? And quite frankly, who's getting paid off of anti-racism work? So if you're only learning and listening to white people, that's still not doing the work because you're not actually hearing and getting information on how to show up from the people you're actually trying to be an ally to. The next is radical empathy. I think when we think empathy, it's very passive. We're saying, oh, I see you, I hear you, I feel you. And I believe that we need to move far past being passive about how we're empathetic. And we need to say, how do I play into how you are hurting? And for white people, that's a reckoning that needs to be had, to say, what are the benefits that I hold that continue to give you less access, less opportunity? And that's often resources, money, land. Which is also another conversation that needs to be had in terms of the Indigenous community. It's none of our land, really. But also looking at the critical empathy of how do I have a voice? How do I redistribute those powers for the benefit of the marginalized groups? So that radical empathy, not just to say I see you, but how do I play into how you're existing in one way or another? And the next is intentional action. It's not enough for white people to show up in this movement and do something until they feel better. I often teach that anti-racism work is not self-improvement work for white people. It is not self-help. It's not a self-help space for white people to come in, to make a post, to throw money at an issue and say, I have checked off this box that I am now anti-racist. That's not how it works. Anti-racism work is not over until it has been proven to us that Black lives matter in a variety of spaces. During this program, we have talked about medical system, the prison system, the school system. There are so many ways that racism has been braided into our normalcy, braided into what we consider as normal, as the default of existence. And it's a little frustrating when we consider the ways that we keep saying these institutions this, these institutions that. Institutions are simply made up of individual people that we need to be holding accountable until changes happen. And so looking at that framework of knowledge plus empathy plus action, critical knowledge, radical empathy, intentional action, hopefully that can be a guide for how people are showing up in this anti-racism movement, not as an ally, but as an accomplice. I don't need you to stand beside me and say, I hear you, I see what you're going through. We need white people to say, I hear you, I recognize how I have benefited in a system that has a historical background that I am still gaining benefits from, and I am committed to being an accomplice with you to upend those systems until it is completely over. There is no stopping point until Black lives truly matter.
So Rachel, when you mentioned about people we should be listening to, so who are some of those people that you think we should be listening to right now? For people who are trying to be educated about this, who are the voices who have not been at the fore of these conversations nearly as much as they really need to be?
So I'm really excited to take this opportunity to highlight something. There's so much information online. There's books, there's templates, there's websites, there's people you can follow that it takes, especially in these times when there's so many articles of who you should be following, what you can be doing. I want to take this moment to say, are people who are practicing, who are coming into this space to say, I want to be anti-racism, are you only listening to the Black people with a platform? Are you only listening to the Black people who have so many followers who get you excited? I want to challenge all the white people to listen to what their Black neighbors are saying. Listen to what the Black children in their neighborhood are saying they need. Listen to your Black coworker. Listen to your Black teammate. Black voices matter at all levels. This is not, activism is not a celebrity playing field. It's not for who gets the most followers, gets heard the most. If you are truly anti-racist, you need to be listening to the Black people who are in your spaces, and you need to be doing what you can do to be an ally and accomplice to them, and not just following whatever trends are happening in any space of who you should be listening to. Anti-racism work happens on your platform. A lot of people think, oh, I only have so many followers. Your platform is your kitchen table. Your platform is your neighborhood. Your platform is your classroom. So people need to start taking personal responsibility for how they're showing up. And I'm in this space where I refuse to give any more check boxes for white people. If you follow this person, if you do this thing, if you show up in this way, no, I expect people to braid this work into their everyday lives. Anti-racism work is not a checklist, and this fight is not over until Black lives are proven that they matter.
Rachel, I am so grateful for everything you just offered to us and everyone watching. It's exciting. You are a true guide in unlearning and relearning. I just want to mention your project, The Great Unlearn, which I actively participate in and really have been moved by, is a great way to begin this journey. It's donation-based, self-paced, and it's an incredible, you just were the greatest advertisement for it. I think that could be. So I encourage everybody to check it out. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
For me, being anti-racist has a lot of different dimensions. You have to think about how you can help, what people are calling for in terms of supporting a movement. But you also have to look at what's right in front of you. And that's what I've always felt. And for me, one of the things that's right in front of me is my daughter, is my young, beautiful Latinx daughter. How do I raise my child to be truly anti-racist, to be part of making a change? And not only just for her, but how can she influence her friends, her environment, and so on? Danny, I know that recently I reached out to you specifically because you're a new mom. And I know that this is real for you too. What does this look like for you?
Girl, first of all, I appreciate you reaching out. You know, that meant a lot to me to just be able to express how I've been feeling. And as a mom, you know, to hear George Floyd cry out for his mother was heavy. And I have not yet
I know, baby, I know.
I've not yet been able to cry. I have not had the words. And when before Freya was born, I had this fear of like being a mom because I was going to be raising a Black child and bringing a Black child into this world and what that meant. And then once I had her, I had this like fear kind of lifted off my shoulders because I felt like mama bear, you know, like I can protect my child, you know. And then I'm reminded 6 months in her being alive that with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, with situations like Christian Cooper, Ayanna Dior, George Floyd, that the world don't give a damn, as Tasty said, about Black and brown people. And that maybe as a mom, I can't save her from this ugly, abusive world that she is going to be raised in. But when I look at her eyes, I'm like, you know what? I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to raise a beautiful human being, and I can teach her that she comes from kings and queens, and that she comes from a strong people. And now, even though there's so many things that have been taken away from her, even before she came out of my womb, one thing is that they cannot steal her joy, that she will still be able to thrive, that she still will be successful, you know, and it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take all of us. And like, I didn't really wanna do this in the beginning, but we have a responsibility as people in this world to educate and to add and to use all of our being, whether that is marching, whether that is our vote, whether that is an argument that you have to have with somebody about this thing. You know, it's going to take all of us. And so that's why I was like, you know what, I'll do this. So that's how I've been feeling. I'm just like, been feeling like a little nightmare. But I know there is hope.
Absolutely.
Danny, love you. And I'm so grateful to you for being here and for taking the time away from Priya to be here and be with us. She's still so little, and our babies need so much from us.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it seems simpler to protect our bodies and our milk and our warmth and our love. And I'm getting to this point where we have a 2-year-old and she's out. I already feel her slipping away into the world. You know, we have her at the protest and her language is coming. So how do I talk to her about what we're doing there today? You know, okay, baby, we're here because all these people here believe in kindness and goodness for everybody. Trying to translate a deeply complex idea to a 2-year-old mind. And it's got to start early, and it's got to start now, because that bubble of protection, as you say, it doesn't last forever, as much as we want it to. I'm kind of wrestling all the way over here in Australia, because you should know that these protests are echoing across the world, and they are meaningful across the world. And we are saying his name across the world. And we are addressing our own deeply rooted systemic racism here in Australia. It is worth saying that I am a white woman, and I am the mother of an Indigenous child, which has levels for me. It's worth noting that this country was founded on a racist idea of terra nullius, that there was nobody here, that none of the 260 plus nations that inhabited this continent even existed. From the founding of this country, the system has been racist, and they have enacted things like the White Australia policy. They have actively stolen children from their Black mothers and tried to cut the ties of culture. They have made language, traditional language, illegal to cut the ties of culture. So when you talk about Joy, it's that balance, because I want her to know that truth. I also want her to know my family's history of the Holocaust, that history of survival. I want her to know her Indigenous history of survival, but I also want her to feel strong and joyful.
I think that one of the things that strikes me hearing both of you guys, who I love so much, and one of the things that we have in common, right? Not only are we mothers, but we're strong women. And one of the things that I said to Danny in our conversation recently was, my daughter at the age of 17, I'm watching her and I'm thinking, wow, I did something right. I did something right because I have this amazing young woman who is using her voice. My daughter, unlike myself, I am an Afro-Latina. That means African runs in my blood, newsflash to my Latinx folk. But my daughter, it runs in her blood too, but she is a light-skinned Latina, right? Who sometimes others forget that she is other, right? That she is a minority. So she hears things. She's in conversations with people that forget, because conversations are being had in rooms when we're not in those rooms that are damaging, that are hurtful, that are filled with hatred. So my daughter, instead of being silent, she uses her voice. And
Yes,
so
Elise.
I share this, right? Because I know that we all have little girls, right? We have girls, we have women, future women, and they're watching us. My baby watched me, and 17 years later, that baby is marching. That baby is writing to congressmen and women. She is writing to the Senate. She is writing to assembly people. She is writing to the representatives of our district. She is awake and she is making a difference. So what I say to you beautiful mamas out there is pay attention to what you're saying and what you're doing, because your children are watching and your children are learning from you. I feel a lot of hope for the future, because if there's any indication, just by what you two are, who you two women are, and how you're raising your children, there's hope. There's hope. So as much as we are in pain right now, we have a responsibility. We're raising the future. We are raising people who are going to do, hopefully, a much better job than we've done. So I think it's also really important that we learn, above all, that we have to ask for help. You know what I'm saying? We have to have conversations. We have to have open dialogues. Let's learn from one another. But I also want to be very, very clear about this. Asking for help doesn't mean making Black people do the work. People who are not Black need to listen and then make it their job, not Black people's job, to understand, okay? Make it their job. And I'm gonna say it again for the people in the back. It is not Black people's responsibility at this point in the game to continue to educate you. And I've been exhausted the last 2 weeks. So I can only imagine what it is to be Black in America and have to constantly educate people over and over and over and over and explain to them. The Latinx community stands with you. All humans stand with you. Yaya just said it. People are marching all over the world. We are here with you. Let's continue to use our resources. I love you, mamas. I love you, mamas, so much. And you are raising proud girls. I know it. You are raising queens. I love you guys.
Love you too. And as we talk about allyship, you know, I want to acknowledge my girls. They didn't ask me to do this, but I want to acknowledge Natasha and Kate and Taylor for stepping up to the plate as my white sisters and not making this our responsibility as people of color to put this together. You know, and I'm not saying that in a sense of praising them, but I want to say that in a sense for those who are wondering, as a white person, what can I do? What can I do? There are things you can do, and you have to figure it out. And so I'm going to pass the mic to another white ally sister, Piper. And Piper is going to bring you to someone else who can lay all of this out for us.
It is incredibly important that we work together to change our criminal justice system, which is deeply racist and destructive. I can tell you that from my very first day in prison, it was crystal clear to me that the criminal justice system treats Black women and other women of color much more harshly than white women like me. Widespread racial injustice, including police violence, takes place in the name of public safety. But that is a lie that millions of people across America are finally rejecting out in the streets and in other ways in their lives. No one has worked harder to expose the lies that prop up the criminal justice system than the people who have been through it. I am so thrilled to welcome a woman that I have so much respect and admiration for, Andrea James, who founded the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. So Andrea and I were locked up in the same prison, the basis for Litchfield, although we were not there at the same time. The National Council is one of 8 justice reform organizations that benefit from your donations to the Poussey Washington Fund. We created the fund last year as part of the final season of the show. And almost 9,000 fans of the show, so many of you, have donated in just the last 10 months. So Andrea, I am so happy to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Can you just start telling us a little bit about the work of the National Council specifically, especially in such difficult times?
Thank you, Piper. It is an honor to be here and to have another opportunity to share this information with you, Piper. And we are so grateful for all of the support that you continue to provide for the work that's being led in this country by formerly incarcerated women. The National Council for Incarcerated Women and Girls is an abolitionist advocacy organization and network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls working for significant decarceration of women and girls on our way to our goal of ending incarceration of women and girls. We know, Piper, as you know, that a prison will never be a place for a woman or girl to heal and advance her life. Black women in this country, Piper, are underprotected. We are over-criminalized and over-incarcerated, and Black girls are expelled 4 times the rate of their white peers. We started our work in the Danbury Federal Prison in 2010 as incarcerated women who heard an increase in dialogue about the need to end mass incarceration, but heard nothing about the increase of incarceration of women in this country or about the children and communities we were separated from. My youngest daughter, Piper, as you know, was 12 years old when I went to prison, and my baby boy was 6 months old. The pain of that is indescribable. If you've ever heard the muffled cries of an incarcerated woman at 3 o'clock in the morning, desperate to hold her children, to tell them that she is their mother and that she loves them, it is something that you will never forget. That's right. It's important as we do this work that we center the voices, experiences, and ideas of the women and girls most directly affected as we work to create change.
Yes, I agree as well. And if I may interject, Andrea, where could people look up this information? Do you have a website, or just give us some information so those that want to be involved can then pursue and do their own research?
Our website is nationalcouncil.us. 3 of the organizations supported by Orange is the New Black Who Say Washington Fund are founded and led by formerly incarcerated Black women doing important work focused on housing and education, such as Susan Burton at A New Way of Life and Vivian Nixon at College and Community Fellows. And here at the National Council, we work under our national infrastructure of reimagining communities, demanding that resources be shifted from prisons and policing to investing in communities, creating community-led systems, stopping the separation of mothers from their children through our primary caretakers work, economic development for formerly incarcerated women, and also our most important national state clemency campaign. We're asking governors to use their clemency power to commute the sentences of women who are elderly, pregnant, sick, terminally ill, survived and punished, and long-timers. We hope you will join us in our national campaign to end incarceration of women and girls, as you have always done, Piper. And we believe it's inevitable. We're going to get there. We're going to end incarceration of women and girls, and the National Council is here to help us all get there sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Andrea. I hope that everyone who is watching will donate to these organizations. Please donate today if you can.
Piper, thank you. And Uzo, welcome back. It's good to see you. Stacey Yvonne Abrams is as frank and fierce and formidable as they come. In 2018, Abrams won the Democratic nomination for governor of Georgia, making her the first African-American woman in the United States to be a major party nominee for that office. She lost the race 49% to 50%. She did not concede the election, but sought to stop voter suppression in Georgia by founding Fair Fight Action, which filed a comprehensive lawsuit currently in federal court, challenging the constitutionality of Georgia's election system. She was her high school valedictorian, has a master's in public affairs, holds her JD from Yale, was the first Black woman to give a response to the State of the Union, and the first Black person elected to lead in the Georgia House of Representatives. I also happen to know that Leader Abrams is a bit of a Trekkie and has not only referred to, but has emulated Captain Janeway's unflagging moral compass, even when it appeared that all was lost. Welcome, Leader Abrams. We're very honored that you agreed to join us for this event.
This is my honor.
In a recent Washington Post article, you were quoted as saying, "We live in a time where we have purported leaders who claim to speak for us, but do not know us. And in that ignorance, they make decisions that are designed not for our success, but for our demise." Please talk about this problem and how, before we can eradicate it altogether, we can help to ameliorate it.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you so much, Uzo, and all of you for having me here. I want to begin by understanding what power is, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not people have the ability to set the course of their lives and to enjoy full opportunity. And what we know is that we tend to disembody power in our politics. We think of it as a system, as a structure, but it's nothing more than people. The same people who harbor prejudices, the same people who use dismissive or frankly critical language about us, the same people who vote to steal our power are the ones who hold it now. And we have to understand the difference. We've made our politics this amorphous thing that is outside of our control, but really democracy is about every person having that control. Unfortunately, we live in a nation that from its very beginning has worked to dismantle the connection between people and their power. First, by only saying that white men who owned land could vote, and then forcing a nation through 240 years to claw back the promise in our founding documents. But what we know is that that fight has not stopped. And that fight is intertwined in voter suppression, in criminal justice, and the fight for systemic justice and our public safety. Each of those battles is about whether or not we are seen as human, seen as vital, and seen as American. My work, my mission, my passion comes from being the daughter of two civil rights activists who, as teenagers, faced arrest and ostracization because they believed that they were entitled to more, that their communities were entitled to more. I was raised working poor, although my mom didn't like that, so she called us the genteel poor. Still poverty. We just read books. But what she and my father wanted us to understand was that our commitment to service, to serving others, whether it was going to homeless shelters or to juvenile justice facilities, was how we reasserted our humanity. My mom and dad said no matter how little we had, there was someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. And that's where I begin every single day.
And I mean, even just listening to you speak right now, Leader Abrams, and I've heard you speak numerous times, you are so powerful and a natural born leader. And we're seeing that reclaim of power happening right now throughout the country, in particular with Black women. And that has been an amazing thing to see. Can you speak a little bit about how that shift in exercising or making our voices heard within government, how that is changing America right now?
We know that in the last few elections, Black women have actually outperformed every other demographic group in their level of voting. And it's because Black women know that their lives are on the ballot, that the choices made about whether you have access to healthcare, whether you have access to food, to whether you live in a food desert or not, childcare deserts, the ability to have a job that does not put your life at risk, the ability to give birth without fearing that you will die within a year of your child coming into the world. I live in a state with one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, where Black women are 3 times more likely to die in the year of giving birth, not because of anything that happened at the moment of birth, but because of the lack of infrastructure that values their lives. We live in a country that is stripping away reproductive choice. And for women of color writ large, and Black women in particular, that is often the decision between economic opportunity or economic servitude. Mm-hmm. And we know when it comes to the criminal justice system, Black women are twice as likely to be incarcerated as white women. And so if you look across the country and across the spectrum of issues, Black women have to be a part of the solution because we are often the victims of every single pathology that exists in our society. But I am joyful because I know Black women. I am the daughter of one of the strongest women I've ever known. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, my family writ large is filled with strong Black women who have succeeded despite the obstacles, but who more importantly didn't wait to be told that they were eligible for more, who fought their way through because they knew they could. But more than anything, they reached back and brought others with them. Kate was incredibly kind in her introduction. And one thing that my mom and dad taught me, especially my mother, is you don't just go through the doors the first. Your responsibility is to take it off the hinges and make sure everyone else can get inside. And that's what Black women do. I watch every day as Black women try to beat the odds, despite living in, particularly in this moment of COVID-19, where they're more likely to be the essential workers on the front line. They're more likely to be the ones who do not get paid sick leave. They are more likely to be the ones who have to take care of family members who are suffering, and they're the least likely to be economically resilient. And yet they persist. And so my joy and my deep, profound pride in Black women comes from knowing that we are capable of more, but we are also responsible for demanding more. And when demands are not met, we have to be the ones who stand up and take the power ourselves.
That's right.
Leader Abrams, you are powerful, passionate, eloquent, and you are our promise for a better future. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This has been an amazing reunion for all of us. And I just want to say, you came on this journey with us, and we are also on the journey with you. We came together to make change together, and that's the only way to do it. When I think about Tony McDade, a trans man murdered by police in Tallahassee, Florida, just last month, I want to just take all of us here, all of us, our energy, our collective energy, all of our voices, and lift up his name. And I want to change this country, to make the humanity of all Black people, including Black LGBTQI people, something that this country not only recognizes, but celebrates.
Please look at the links below in the video description to learn more about what we talked about, and especially what you can do to take action. And thank you so much to Color of Change for helping make this event possible.
And thank you to our fans for being with us and for listening. Listening to voices that may be new to us is so important right now. And it's a learning journey, whether it's learning about how we got here or where we go from here. Staying engaged, listening to the voices of people who have been marginalized, especially Black voices, is something we are doing, and we hope that you will too.
Thank you for all the ways you have supported us over so many years. We hope you will give that same support, but I'm demanding that you support. And moreover, to join the fight that's taking place right now. The fight to end the anti-Black violence, the fight to change what we all know must change.
If there is one thing I hope you take away, it's that this isn't just about individual police officers. This is about an entire system that we need to change. If you weren't part of that movement before, you can be a part of it now.
I hope you take away with you the most important idea of all, that you can be a character in the story of change. Wherever you are, please know that we are with you. You have your strength inside of you, and we will be inspired by all the ways you go out and you use it. You can donate, volunteer, protest, sign a petition, get people at work together, or get your family and your friends together to say something or do something, and have that very brave conversation that we know is very hard to have, but it's all the more rewarding to have. And vote, 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 vote.
Bye.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you so much.